A pastor, a mistress, and a deadly secret. What should have been a private confession turned into a brutal crime. Pastor Simon Pregnacy was a man of faith, a guiding light for his congregation in Albania. Respected, admired, and trusted, he stood before his church every Sunday, preaching about honesty, commitment, and the sanctity of marriage. But behind the pulpit, Simon was hiding a scandalous secret, an affair with Victoria Deda, a woman who had given him more than just her love. She was carrying his child. For months, Victoria kept the affair hidden, hoping Simon would do the right thing. But when she realized she was being cast aside like a shameful mistake, she took a step that would change everything. She called Simon's wife, Elira Pregnacy, and revealed the truth. She told her everything: the affair, the lies, and the pregnancy. What Victoria didn't know was that her confession would be the beginning of the end. Instead of facing the consequences, Pastor Simon made a chilling decision: silence her forever. Days later, Victoria was found dead, her life cut short by the man she once trusted. But was this a crime of passion, or a calculated plan to keep his perfect image intact? This is the shocking true story of how Pastor Simon Pregnacy went from preaching salvation to committing murder. Stay tuned as we unravel the dark secrets behind this tragic case. In the quiet town of Leisure, Albania, where faith is the pillar of the community, one man stood above the rest: Pastor Simon Pregnacy. To his congregation, he was more than just a preacher. He was a mentor, a man of wisdom, a spiritual guide. Every Sunday, the town gathered in the old stone church, listening intently as he spoke about righteousness, the importance of family, and the dangers of sin. But behind the church doors, Pastor Simon was living a life filled with deception. For over a year, he had been carrying on a secret affair with Victoria Deda, a woman nearly 20 years younger than him. To the world, Simon was a devoted husband to Elira Pregnacy, the loyal and respected pastor's wife. But in the shadows, he was entangled in a forbidden relationship, one that would soon curve out of control. Victoria was not just any woman, she was deeply in love with Simon and believed in his promises. He had told her they had a future together, that their love was real, that one day he would leave his wife and build a new life with her. But in reality, Simon had no intention of giving up his reputation, his power, or his carefully built image. Then came the moment that changed everything. Victoria discovered she was pregnant. At first, she expected Simon to embrace this news, but instead she saw a side of him she had never seen before: cold, distant, afraid. He urged her to keep it a secret, to trust him, to wait. But as weeks passed, she realized he was not going to acknowledge the baby, nor was he going to leave his wife. Heartbroken and betrayed, Victoria made a decision that sealed her fate. She reached out to Elira Pregnacy and told her everything. She exposed the affair, she revealed the pregnancy, she shattered Simon's carefully guarded secret. And just 48 hours later, Victoria was dead. What happened next would send shockwaves through Albania. A pastor, once seen as a man of virtue, now found himself at the center of a chilling murder case. This is the story of how a man of God became a killer. To understand how Pastor Simon Pregnacy fell from grace, we must first look at the life he built, the beliefs he upheld, and the choices that led to his shocking downfall. Simon was born and raised in Leisure, Albania, a town steeped in tradition, where religion was not just a belief system, but the very foundation of life. His family was deeply devout, attending church every Sunday, praying before every meal, and holding on to faith through even the hardest of times. His father, a respected elder in the community, instilled in him the importance of discipline, morality, and devotion to God. From a young age, Simon was drawn to the church, fascinated by the teachings of Scripture and the power of faith. He was seen as different from the other boys. While they played in the streets, Simon could often be found in the church, listening intently to the sermons, asking questions about sin and salvation. By the time he reached adulthood, it was clear that he was destined for a path of spiritual leadership. Simon's charisma and deep knowledge of religious doctrine quickly made him a favorite among church leaders. He was sent to a seminary in Shkodër, where he honed his theological studies, learning about the responsibilities of a man of God. When he returned to Leisure, he was appointed as the lead pastor of Shen Colley Church, a position that carried immense influence in the town. At the pulpit, Simon preached about the sanctity of marriage, the importance of fidelity, and the dangers of temptation. He urged his congregation to remain steadfast in their faith, to resist the sins of the flesh, and to always uphold the virtues of honesty and righteousness. To those around him, he was the perfect example of a pious man, devoted to his wife, Elira Prenga, dedicated to his faith, and committed to guiding others on the path of righteousness. But beneath this carefully constructed image, Simon was hiding a dark contradiction. While Simon preached about resisting temptation, he himself struggled with it. Despite his religious convictions, he was not immune to the desires and weaknesses of the flesh. As his reputation grew, so did his sense of power. He was no longer just an ordinary man, he was a spiritual leader, someone who was admired, respected, and even feared. This sense of power slowly led him down a dangerous path. Some whispered that Simon had always been drawn to women, that even before his affair with Victoria Dida, he had been known to develop close relationships with female members of the congregation. But no one dared to question him. After all, he was the pastor. To accuse him of wrongdoing would be unthinkable. But then came Victoria. She was young, beautiful, and deeply impressionable. Unlike the other women who admired Simon from a distance, Victoria was bold. She was drawn to his wisdom, his authority, and the way he spoke about love and faith. She saw him as a man, not just a pastor. And for Simon, this was both intoxicating and dangerous. It started with secret conversations, talks about faith, life, and love. Then came the stolen glances, the late-night meetings, and finally, the affair that would seal both of their fates. To Simon, Victoria was a temptation he could not resist. She made him feel young, powerful, desired. He knew it was wrong, but he convinced himself it was just a fleeting weakness, a moment of human imperfection. But for Victoria, it was different. She saw a future with Simon. She believed his words when he told her he loved her, that she was special, that their love was real. And when she became pregnant, she thought it was fate. She was wrong. When she revealed the pregnancy to Simon, expecting joy, she was instead met with fear, anger, and betrayal. Simon saw the end of everything he had built, his career, his reputation, his marriage. He begged her to stay quiet. He told her they would figure it out. He promised he would take care of her. But as weeks passed, Victoria realized that Simon was stalling. He wasn't going to acknowledge their child. He wasn't going to leave his wife. He wasn't going to stand by her the way he had promised. It had started like any other Sunday. The congregation filled the pews of Shen Colley Church, eagerly awaiting Pastor Simon's sermon. Dressed in his usual dark robes, Bible in hand, he walked to the altar, clearing his throat before delivering a message on the power of redemption. Irony. As he spoke about forgiveness, faithfulness, and the consequences of sin, there was one person in the crowd whose heart pounded with rage and heartbreak. Victoria Dida. She had been silent for too long.
Deceived for too long, Simon had promised her a future. Whispered words of love made her believe she was special. But now she saw him for what he truly was, a liar, a fraud, a man who would never claim her or their unborn child.
As he preached about righteousness, she knew the truth. He was the greatest sinner of them all, and so, that evening, she made the decision that would change everything. She picked up the phone, she dialed the number, and when Elira Prenga, the pastor's wife, answered, Victoria told her everything. The affair,
The lies,
the pregnancy, silence on the other end. Then a single question from Elira. Are you telling me my husband is the father of your child? Victoria didn't hesitate. Yes.
Elira didn't wait. Within hours, she confronted Simon in their home, her voice shaking, her hands trembling.
How could you? How could you do this to me, to us, to God?
Simon, for the first time in his life, had no words.
This was it. The walls were closing in. The life he had built, the reputation he had protected so carefully, it was slipping through his fingers. His wife knew. And soon the whole town would know. The next morning, rumors were already spreading like wildfire. A scandal of this magnitude was unheard of in Leisure. People whispered in hushed voices, their eyes filled with disbelief. The pastor? An affair?
And she's pregnant?
What will happen now?
Simon tried to contain the damage. He begged Elira to stay silent, promising it was just a mistake. But Elira wasn't willing to be complicit in his lies. She was hurt, humiliated, and furious.
And Victoria, she wasn't done yet. She had spent too long in the shadows, hidden like a shameful secret. But now she had the power. The truth was out, and she refused to be ignored any longer. Simon was trapped. His worst nightmare was becoming reality. And so, in a moment of desperation, he made a horrific decision. Less than 48 hours later, she was found dead. When news of Victoria's death spread, the town of Leisure was in disbelief. Some refused to believe that Simon could have been involved. After all, he was a pastor, a man of faith. But others weren't so sure. The timing was too perfect, too convenient. The same woman who had just exposed his darkest secret was now dead.
The whispers grew louder.
Had Simon acted out of desperation, killing Victoria in a moment of rage, or had he carefully planned her murder, ensuring that she could never speak again? One thing was certain: the truth would eventually come out. And when it did, the man who once stood at the altar preaching about salvation would be forced to face his own sins. The people of Leisure were left grappling with a devastating realization. The man they had trusted, the man who had baptized their children, who had officiated their weddings, who had counseled them through hardships, was now being whispered about in hushed voices as a murderer. The scandal did more than just destroy one man's reputation. It shook the foundation of faith in the town itself. For many, Simon's betrayal was more than just a personal failing. It was a betrayal of the entire church. If a pastor, someone who had dedicated his life to spreading God's word, could commit such an unspeakable crime, then what did that say about the institution he represented? Attendance at Shen Colley Church plummeted. Parishioners who had once listened to Simon's sermons with unwavering faith now found themselves questioning everything. Was he ever truly a man of God? Had his sermons always been built on lies?
How long had he been deceiving them?
The church elders struggled to contain the damage, urging the community to separate Simon's sins from their faith. But the truth was undeniable. Trust had been broken, and trust is not so easily restored. Meanwhile, Simon's wife, Elira Prenga, found herself at the center of public scrutiny. Some pitied her, seeing her as a victim of her husband's betrayal and crimes. Others whispered that she must have known something, that no wife could be so blind to such deception, and Victoria's family, devastated and grieving, demanded justice. The question remained, would Pastor Simon Prenga be held accountable? Or would his power and influence allow him to escape the consequences of his actions? What began as an illicit love affair had spiraled into a nightmare, a story of betrayal, murder, and the shocking downfall of a man who once stood as a pillar of faith. And as the truth unraveled, one thing became clear. No one, not even a man of God, is above the weight of his own sins. Pastor Simon Prenga's secret didn't just end one life, it shattered many. His affair with Victoria Deda, his betrayal of Elira Prenga, and the horrific decision to end Victoria's life ripped through the town of Leisure like wildfire. At the center of it all was a man who had once been revered, a man trusted to guide others in faith, now exposed as a liar, an adulterer, and a murderer. The moment Victoria's body was found, suspicion fell heavily on Simon. He tried to feign innocence, to act as though he was as shocked as everyone else, but people were no longer willing to look at him through the lens of faith. The once untouchable pastor was now the subject of town gossip, police interrogations, and public scrutiny. His sermons fell on deaf ears. The congregation that once filled the pews of Shen Colley Church dwindled, their faith in him shattered. Elira, the devoted wife who had stood by Simon for years, now found herself in the middle of a scandal she never asked for. The humiliation was unbearable. Her husband had not only betrayed her, but had become a killer in his desperate attempt to keep his sins hidden. Her marriage was over. Her faith was shaken. Her reputation was in ruins. Elira left town, seeking refuge away from the whispers, the judgment, the pain. But no matter where she went, she carried the weight of Simon's sins with her. For the people of Leisure, this wasn't just about a single act of betrayal. It was about the collapse of trust in a man they had looked up to. If a pastor, a man meant to lead them in righteousness, could commit such an unspeakable crime, what did that mean for faith itself? Could they ever trust another leader again? Was their faith misplaced all along?
Some turned away from the church entirely. Others sought solace in their belief, determined to separate God from the man who had disgraced his name.
Simon Prenga's lies couldn't protect him forever. As evidence mounted, police closed in, and soon the once respected pastor found himself in handcuffs, his carefully built empire reduced to nothing. The courtroom was packed the day his verdict was read. The people of Leisure sat in silence, waiting to hear the fate of the man they had once called their spiritual leader. Guilty. With those words, the weight of his actions crashed down upon him. The man of God would now spend the rest of his life behind bars. Pastor Simon Prenga's fall from grace was more than just a scandal. It was a cautionary tale, a tale of how power can corrupt, how secrets can destroy, and how even the most revered figures can fall victim to their own sins. Faith is not about the men who preach it, but about the truth that remains long after they are gone.
In the end, no secret stays buried forever.
What do you think about this shocking case? Was Pastor Simon's downfall inevitable, or could he have made a different choice? And what about Victoria? Did she underestimate the dangers of exposing the truth? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you found this story chilling, you won't want to miss my next video where I uncover another shocking case of deception and betrayal within the church, one that's even darker than this. Click here to watch it now.
And remember, no secret stays buried forever.